Hello, everyone, and thanks for watching Senior Living Live. My name is Melissa. I have Yalily Smith joining me today. She is the owner of The Traveling Therapist, and we are here to preview her upcoming webinar entitled, When Is It Time for Long-Term Care? You can catch her presentation live April 6th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Yalily, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate you joining us today and for your upcoming webinar. Now, it is entitled, When is it time for long-term care? That is, of course, a question that we get a lot. People not wanting to leave their current situation too soon, and then certainly not too late. But when you're caring for someone with dementia, there are a lot more factors in play. First, before we even get to that, what are the first stages of dementia, and how can a loved one identify that very first stage?
Um, Typically, you will find three. Some schools of thought agree with four, being fourth has end of life. But typically, you will see early, middle, and early, moderate, and late stage. And those stages can range anywhere from a transition of a few months in between stages to several years, 10, 12 years in between stages. So it really can be challenging to care for someone with dementia because of the fact that you never really know when they're going to transition to the next stage.
Yeah, and a dementia diagnosis, as you hit right there with that answer, doesn't always mean that the individual immediately needs additional care. You know, it could take several years before they get to that point. But at some point, that probably will become necessary. So, what are some tips that you can give people to help weigh the pros and cons in deciding when that timing is right for additional care?
I typically, so the first question on the webinar that we're going to be addressing is actually the most complicated question, which is what you're asking me right now. And the reason why it's complicated is because there's such a thing as too late. There's such a thing as, there's never, to me, there's never such a thing as too early, because when you're a senior and you're living alone at home, or you're living with an aging partner and you don't have family that you can rely on that's maybe nearby or that can come and visit you on a regular basis, it really poses a lot of different risks to the quality of your life, regardless of whether you have dementia or not. So the earlier you can start introducing the idea of additional care, the better, because they're more comfortable. So even if it's in the sense of like, well, maybe just a helper in the home, CNA, home health aide, and then eventually integrate into assisted living. But we're going to touch on the different signs for each stage. My personal opinion is the same way that we have an age where we're suggested to go get our first mammogram, our first colon screening. After your 60s, you should definitely start doing an annual neurological evaluation for cognitive decline. Just the same way you go and you go check in with your PCP for an annual checkup, or your dentist, there should be someone checking on your brain and your brain health as well.
Yeah, and those checkups are crucial and critical. And if somebody is watching this, you know, as you said, there are various stages of the disease, and now, thankfully, these days, various different types of help to help someone through the process of dementia. What are some ways that someone right now who may be a caregiver, what can they do in terms of a checklist to see what kind of help their loved one may need at this time?
It really does depend on how the dementia is coming out, how it's appearing, and how it's affecting the person. Sometimes the person with dementia will have not just the forgetfulness, but they'll have physical needs as well. And so in those cases, you want to evaluate the whole picture. And that will definitely depend on how much care the person needs to have and what you're looking at. But let's assume that the person that is watching and wondering is someone who has a loved one that's still mobile. They're still mobile, but they need some assistance with their daily life. You want to start looking as soon as possible, constantly really observing on a day-to-day as you interact with them. Um, are they forgetting their words? More importantly, the terms. So terms for things. Um, are they having a harder time when they forget remembering again? So I can forget that word for that one thing. And then if I stop for a few seconds and I really think about it, I can remember it. But if the person takes several minutes or forgets and then just can't even think about it again, that's a sign. Same with names. Having difficulty performing tasks that require social interaction, where they have to remember things that have happened recently. That's another sign. Losing things, forgetting where they put things, even though they usually put it there on a regular basis. Now, you know, it's not, it's, and the thing to see is most caregivers will be like, oh, but that happens all the time. I do it. I misplace the remote all the time. But it's a little bit more than that. It's like I misplaced it, but I just can't think of how to retrace my steps to find it. So it's not just about the act of losing something or forgetting a name or a term, is the problem solving aspect of it. That's the real sign there. Because you lose something and you can tell yourself, let me think about the last place I put it. But a person with dementia can't problem solve like that.
Right. And you hear examples of people who you mentioned the lost remote. You find the remote, it's in the refrigerator or it's someplace that it just doesn't belong. And that is a sign. As you said, it's the problem solving, because at that point, you're probably never going to be able to retrace your steps if that's where you indeed left it. So great answer there. How can caregivers reconcile the guilt aspect that comes along with making a decision to seek additional help?
That's always going to be a personal journey, I think, for the caregiver. But one of the things that I always remind them of is that this is not a decision that typically a caregiver that loves their parent or their spouse or, their loved one. This is typically not a decision that is made lightly. Whenever I work with families in these cases, I always ask them, like, you thought about this, right? And they're like, absolutely. Like, we've been thinking about it for months or even years. And it's haunted us for all this time, like this decision. So first thing is, I know for sure that these families are not just waking up and saying, oh, I just want to disturb the life of my loved one. It's something that's made very conscientiously. And I always remind them, this is not about the disturbance of the quality of their life, is about providing better quality to your loved one's life. Because if you're I've had countless experiences of loved ones, families that out of guilt have left the person in the home, and it's taken 2, 3, sometimes even 4 falls to happen, hip breaks, arms, things like that, person ending up in a wheelchair, before they finally find it in them to decide, this is just not safe, this is just not okay anymore. I've had cases where the person lives with their spouse, and so they feel like, well, it's okay because they have their spouse there. Well, they've been victims of fraud. They've had their electric cut off. They've had their water cut off because the one that was paying the bills has the dementia. The other one doesn't know to identify the dementia. And so they're both it's like the blind leading the blind. and they're both caught in that web, and the family's just saying, well, they're going to be okay because they're together. And so I just let them know, like, it's hard, it's extremely hard, but if you're conscientious about where you're putting your loved one, you make sure that it's a safe community, that it's a community that you've studied well, that you've gone and familiarized yourself with the staff, that you feel you have a good rapport with. The quality of the life of the person is going to be so much better there than living at home by themselves or with someone else that's also aging.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you on that. And, it's a very hard decision to make, but there are many options out there, and people who are literally waiting to help. So
Mhm.
great answer. What are some resources that you can give people right now that are watching? And if they want to get in touch with you before our webinar, how can they do that?
Um, so the best way to get in touch with me on a regular basis is my email, or sending a message through our website. And the email's travelingtherapist, the number one @gmail.com, or thetravelingtherapist.net is the website. And that way I always know I get it and I respond as soon as I can. And then my number one resource, because it's pretty much all over the United States, anybody can access it, is the Alzheimer's Association website, alz.org. And I work a lot with them. All of our therapists work with them. I do webinars with them on a regular basis, educational programs. And now that we've gone virtual, these programs have really been able to reach a lot more of an audience, but they're a wonderful resource.
Yeah, that sounds great. And so far today, you've been a wonderful resource, and I know you will be in the future for your upcoming webinar. Yalily Smith, great preview. The webinar is April 6th, and it is
Yep.
entitled, When is it time for long-term care? We will see you then. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, guys.